Hi, this is Ron Gannett here in beautiful Saddlebrook, Arizona. And I certainly hope that these videos on loving your new normal have been a blessing to you. Today we've come to the last one. And in a moment we're going to talk about grace. Oh, amazing grace. But before I do, I want you to know that I'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments or suggestions, or maybe stories to tell us of how these videos have helped you, please respond to this email or email me directly at rongannett@gmail.com. And I would love to hear from you. Well, today I'd like to wrap up this series with number 15, and I'm calling it Grace. Grace. Grant more than you receive. Oh, I remember probably I was about 6 years old, and on a Saturday night our family went to visit this older couple. And on the back patio, he and my dad sat as this older gentleman smoked a cigar. Well, everybody left, and I was left in the backyard with this little cigar. Well, without thinking no one could see me, not realizing as a 6-year-old that the back windows where the back wall was all glass and everybody could see what I was doing, I picked up that little cigar stub, I stuck it in my mouth, and I acted like I was smoking a stogie. Well, the next morning was Sunday morning, and I was standing at my mother's dresser, watching her put on her jewelry and her makeup, etc., etc. And graciously, she turned down to me and says, "Ron, how did you enjoy your cigar last night?" Oh, I was caught. But you know, as I reflect upon that little story, I think, boy, my mother was full of grace. And all of us have moments in our lives where we don't want to get caught. And if we are caught, we want someone to throw us a towel. We want someone to give us grace that maybe we don't deserve. You know, there's a wonderful grace connection in the Bible. I call it Jesus, Stephen, and then Paul. Because if you look at the grace that Jesus gave on the cross, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I would imagine that Stephen was there watching Christ, because when he is martyred in the book of Acts, and as the stones are killing him, he falls to his knees and said, "Lord, don't hold this sin against them." And we do know that the Apostle Paul, who was then Saul of Tarsus, was watching the stoning and maybe even responsible for it. And in 2 Timothy chapter 4, when he is dying, and those who have heard him, he says, "Oh, leave them with the Lord." And those Christians who disappointed him, he said, "God, don't hold this against them." And I think what Jesus did on the cross, Stephen saw and reflected in his life, and the Apostle Paul eventually extended that same grace. You know, the interesting thing about all three of those men is that the audience where they gave that grace did not receive it. The people, the soldiers, did not take Jesus off the cross. Those throwing the rocks didn't stop and go out and have a cold drink with Stephen. And Nero, the emperor, did not elevate Paul to some royal position, but rather he executed him. You know, sometimes people don't receive our grace. People ignore it. They act like maybe they deserve it. And yet, those three individuals gave grace in spite of the response of other people. And I am convinced that God wants us to give grace because there's an audience beyond the audience to whom we are giving grace. And today, you and I are recipients of grace that came through Jesus, through Stephen, through Paul, and to us. And even though those audiences didn't respond to that grace, here today we have the privilege to do it. You know, my friends, grace, we call it amazing because grace is so powerful. It is the most powerful force on planet Earth. I love the book by Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. And in that story of Jean Valjean and in his conflict with Inspector Javert, Javert sees grace over and over again demonstrated by Jean Valjean. And finally, at the end of the novel, when he sees that this grace is overwhelming and given to him, he can't take it anymore. And Inspector Javert takes his own life because he doesn't know how to handle the grace that was given to him. I wonder if that's why the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 said, "I am what I am by the grace of God." because he realized how powerfully God's grace had changed his life, and now God had made him an instrument of that grace in the lives of other people. Oh, my dear ones, today God has called you to be an instrument of that grace, to share that grace in your world. Oh, probably there's someone in your life right now who has hurt you, who is doing you bad, that you think to yourself, how could I ever forgive? How could I ever help that person? My friends, the only way sometimes you can respond is to give them grace, knowing that the grace may not be received, it may not be rewarded, but maybe there's a bigger audience out there that one day will be impacted by the grace that you give to that dear person. I remember having a lady who used to make fun of me all the time for being a pastor. And I would go into her place of business and she would find a little barb to throw at me because she was not a religious person, did not attend church. But I remember one day walking into her place of business and noticing she wasn't there. And I asked about her and they said, oh, didn't you hear her? She had a brain tumor and she's had surgery. She's in the hospital. Well, I went to visit that dear lady. Half of her head was shaved and a big scar was there from the tumor they had removed. And I had the opportunity to hold her hand, to share scriptures, and to pray, and to give her some grace that she never gave to me. But you know, a couple years later, she came and visited our church for a special function and brought her grandchildren. And I thought we had the wonderful opportunity to share the love of God, the good news of Christ with her and her dear family, just by extending grace to people who don't give it back. Oh, my friends, today, I pray that during COVID-19, we all will develop a new normal of grace, that we grant more than we ever receive, because that's exactly how Jesus Christ treated us. Oh, my friends, I promise that if you develop that new normal, if you extend that grace more than you ever will receive, I promise you will love it.